Cool, thank you. How good was that keynote? That was fantastic. It is a little bit daunting backing up after someone who is a real designer when you are someone who has basically just called yourself one for long enough that it's sort of stuck. But I'll do my best. So this session is called Design 101 for Programmers. That's me, that's my handle. At me if you like. I like to be added. This was almost going to be called something different. I was almost going to call it How to Not Suck at Design, because the session started as an idea with a conversation I had with my good friend Adam, and I was talking to him and saying, look, I feel like I should do design-related subjects at DevWorld, but I don't feel like I know enough about any particular design topic to really do that. And he said, well, I don't think you need to. He said, what I would really like is I would like a session where someone didn't go into heaps of deep detail like color theory or typography sort of theory. I would just like someone to give me some really basic tips on how to suck less at design. And he's being modest, he doesn't suck at design at all, but I thought that is a cool idea, I can do that. So I'm going to do exactly that. This is the absolute polar opposite of a deep dive into design, right? This is a very shallow dive into design. I'm just going to throw at you a bunch of really simple little ideas, tips, opinions to do with design. And you know what? You will disagree with some of these, I guarantee you. And that is totally fine, right? Design is subjective. Hopefully you won't disagree with all of them. Hopefully at least some of them you will be able to take away and they will help you in your design. Now just to be clear, I'm talking today about visual design, right? I'm not talking about animations, I'm not talking about UX, user experience stuff. And just in case anyone here is not completely clear on the distinction between those two things, hopefully this slide just totally clarifies. Is that right? All right, we're on the same page? Okay, so I am going to cover some things to do with fonts. I'm going to talk about colors, I'm going to do a little bit of stuff on icons, and I am going to, there's a few sort of miscellaneous things that didn't fit anywhere else, I'm calling them layout. So we've got heaps to go through. I'm going to just jump straight in. And I'm going to start with a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I'm going to talk about fonts. Or if you went to design school, typefaces. I didn't go to design school. So fonts. And my first red hot tip for you today is this. It is to never use two fonts where one will do. I swear, if I had $1 for every time someone said to me, I'm just not really good at pairing fonts together, at working out like what fonts go with other fonts. Seriously, if I had $1 every time someone said that, I'd have several dollars, like 3 or 4 at least. So it's this idea that you have to find a heading font and a body font, and they have to go nicely together. And I guess that idea comes from websites like this. This is, I think, fontpair.com. something. And this is a cool site. If you really do want to pair fonts together, go here. And I agree with most of the pairings on here, so that's cool. I'm just saying you don't actually need to. So here's an example. Here is a block of text in the font Myriad. It's a nice font. It's the one I'm using right throughout this presentation. Do you know what font pairs beautifully with Myriad? Myriad Bold. Right, look at that. It's beautiful. It's almost like those two fonts were designed to go together. Isn't that incredible? All right, here's another one. This is DIN, which is kind of a more industrial, techie kind of font. Do you know what pairs beautifully with DIN? DIN Bold. Look at that. This works with serif fonts as well, right? This is Garamond. This is Garamond Bold. All right, so am I saying you should never pair fonts? No, of course there is a time to use a nice heading font and pair it with a body font, and that's cool. I'm just saying you don't need to. And this is actually this is the first of many of my points today, which could be summarized by saying, if you don't feel like you are very good at making design decisions, then just make fewer design decisions. All right, so that's number one. Number two with the fonts is, look, custom fonts, use them. And I know some will disagree, and there are good arguments for using system fonts. I totally understand those arguments. All I'm saying is if you are looking for a simple way to give your app a bit of a lift, just a little nudge in the direction of uniqueness and interest, I mean, it's not hard to customize fonts in your app generally. Just a nice, simple way of giving yourself a little lift. But do bear this in mind. As you're thinking about this, the sort of counterpoint to this is to think about the fact that custom fonts don't have to mean crazy fonts. So what do I mean by that? Well, let me explain by way of an anecdote. So I had a developer friend who was showing me one of his apps he was working on, and he came to me to ask for some design advice. And one of the questions he asked was, do you think that I should use a custom font? And of course I said yes. And he said, well, what do you recommend? So I had a look at his app, I had a think, and I suggested a couple of fonts. So at the time, this was an iOS app, and at the time the system font for iOS was Helvetica Neue. So I suggested a couple of fonts I've used in apps. I find them quite versatile, quite nice. So Lato is one, and Open Sans was another. And he went away and he looked at those two fonts, and he came back and he said, yeah, look, I mean, they're nice fonts. I like them, but to me, they don't look that different to Helvetica. Like, they look like they're maybe 10% different, and it doesn't seem worth it to me to go to all the trouble of customizing all the labels in my app to use those fonts and losing all of the advantages of using the system font when it's only slightly different. Now, that's fine. Like I said, I totally understand why developers like to use system fonts. But I couldn't disagree more with the idea that it wouldn't make a difference to use one of these fonts. So here is a feature wall, right? This is something that people do in interior design to create a particular effect, right? They paint one wall in a room a bright, vibrant color, and they maybe match it with some other decor. And if they do it well, it's nice, right? Now, kind of crazy, interesting feature fonts, they are the feature wall of the graphic design world, right? We use them sparingly to create an effect. We use them for main headings, perhaps, or they might be connected to your brand. Your brand might use one of these fonts, so you want to have it somewhere through your app in various ways. So we use them sparingly. But we wouldn't use a font like this to render entire blocks of text, right? That would be crazy. We certainly wouldn't render an entire app in a font like this. In the same way that we don't generally paint entire rooms bright green and pair it with green carpet, at least not if we want to sell our house one day. We don't generally do that. And if people want to go a step further and also paint the ceiling green, then I don't have any advice for those people. No, we don't generally paint entire interiors of our house in a bright color like green. But you know what? By the same time, we also don't generally paint the entire interior of our house pure white, because it's actually surprisingly difficult to pull off a look like this. You really have to know what you're doing. Most of us, if we just used a plain white color on our interior walls, it would just look drab. So we don't generally do this. And honestly, what kind of person would even want to live in a house like that? Anyway, so no, we don't generally use just plain white. We usually use some kind of tint of off-white. If you could see my computer now, you would see that half of that screen is not white. It is a slightly different color. Let's just pretend that's what it looks like. So we tend to use very subtle shades of off-white. And the thing is, if you go to Bunnings and you get them to mix up your preferred shade of off-white, and you look at how much paint they put in, how much tint they put into the bucket, it's tiny. It's absolutely minuscule. And if you were to get those like plain white and some subtle tint, and you were to paint a swatch on your wall, just a little swatch next to each other, yeah, they wouldn't look very different. But once you paint an entire wall, indeed, once you paint an entire house in that tint, the difference really does multiply. So going back to fonts, to type, so on that side is Helvetica, on the other side is Lato. Yeah, they're not wildly different. They are pretty similar glyphs, but there are differences, right? Helvetica, one of its trademarks is it is very consistent. The stroke weight right from start to finish is very, very even, whereas other fonts like Lato, they play with it a bit, right? You've got like bits that are a little bit fatter, you've got strokes that are a bit skinnier. It just makes it a little bit sort of more whimsical. Lato has this other sort of quirk where one corner of the end of the stroke is square and the other one is round, so just little differences. Now, yeah, the glyphs aren't that different. Once you start using it in a whole word, yeah, still pretty similar. You expand out to whole paragraphs and blocks of text, it starts to be quite different. Now, if you render an entire app in one of these fonts, you get quite a difference indeed. Now, I should explain, I'm going to show you a lot of, a number of apps of my own as examples. Now, I probably could have found better examples in other people's apps, but, you know, I'm a designer and, you know, we're kind of vain, aren't we? And I just wanted to show some of my apps on the screen. So I'm going to do that, but I should explain, for some reason, a significant proportion of the apps I have built in my career are in some way related to breasts. I do not know why that has happened. It's my niche. So this is an app that I designed and built. It is a breastfeeding app for men, because that totally makes sense. So in this app, I chose to use Lato, this font. You can tell I quite like this font. But to me, I wanted to use it because the subtle kind of whimsical feel of it just really added to the feel of this app. Everything, the color scheme, the icons, the photos we used, even actually the language that we wrote the copy in this app. I just felt it really kind of added to that feel. Now watch what happens if I change this app to be entirely rendered in Helvetica. Okay, someone says, ooh. Right, back to Lato. Now the thing is, I don't know if you see what I see when I do that. Right? I have no idea what your perception of, you might be looking at that and going, yeah, I'm not really seeing it, James. To me, there's a real difference when the font is applied over such a large area. To me, fonts are the paint of design. They make such a difference, even when they're not that different actually physically. Just one other reason why I think custom fonts can be a good idea. We were just talking before in the keynote about different platforms. I think that using a custom font that is neither the system font for iOS or for Android can be a really good way of getting some consistency between the versions. I totally agree with what was said. I do like to customize between the two platforms. And you do have to make a lot of compromises in terms of consistency of your brand, of the style of your app. And to me, using a consistent font that is a custom font can be one way of just having the same paint, right? But I would warn you though, if you are using custom fonts on Android, you need to test the hell out of them. Because seriously, you can throw any font at iOS, it renders it beautifully. Not so on Android. You need to test it every screen density, particularly if they're slightly lighter fonts, you get some real issues. Okay, so custom fonts, yeah, just have a good think about using them. But this is a caveat to that. I think we need to be good font citizens, or to put it differently, we should not be that guy. And what I mean by this is, up until recently, our apps tended to exist in their own little world, right? Someone launches an app on a smartphone or a tablet, and your app takes over the screen and you own the screen, so do what you want. You know, you want custom fonts, crazy styles, go nuts. But increasingly, our apps are coexisting in other interesting places alongside other apps. So here's an example, another one of my breastfeeding apps. This one is for women, just to mix it up a bit. So this app obviously has a really, really custom design, super custom, crazy thing. And one of the key features of the crazy design for this app is the font. So I wanted to have a Today widget for this app. And you know, the Today widget you pull down and there's a bunch of other widgets, first party, third party things. And so of course, you know, my font is super important to my brand, to my style here. So of course, when I made my Today widget, I used my crazy font. And doesn't that look awesome? It doesn't, right? That looks terrible. There's this big sort of scrolling thing of system font, and in the middle of it is my one going, hey, look at me with my crazy font. So no, I didn't do that. I just used the system font. I just think we need to be aware of the context, and we don't need to shout all the time. This is my last font-related tip, and this is just a real simple idea you might like to try. It's kind of counterintuitive, but try using larger fonts. When you use larger fonts, try using thinner weights. Right? So the conventional wisdom is, you know, the bigger the text, you usually go bolder. Well, I'm just suggesting, just try the bigger the font, just try going skinnier. So here is the traditional thing we would do. We got just a normal weight font in the body, and this is kind of exaggerated, right? A great big bold title. But have a look at that. That's an interesting look, and it's something that doesn't sort of occur to people a lot of the time. So that's it for fonts. Let's talk about some color stuff. All right, it can be hard to choose color. A lot of people say to me, I really struggle to understand how to put colors together, and they start thinking they need to understand color theory, and maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't. So one tip I have for you is just outsource that. Just outsource the selection and use a website like, there's lots of them. This is one I use, color.adobe.com. It used to be called Kuler, K-U-L-E-R, they rebranded. It looks like this. Right, you search for swatches. You can say, I want a forest palette. I want shades of blue, oceans, whatever you want. You can sort by most popular. You can export these straight out into the Adobe programs, or if you don't use them, you can just sample from the screen. Really nice way of just finding some colors. But you might say, well, that's fine, but I'm not even good at choosing 2 colors from those palettes to use. Well, if you don't feel like you're good at pairing colors at all, maybe a suggestion for you is to try just using 1 color. Right? Again, reduce the decision making. Just use a single color or shades of that color. So here is an example of an app where I did this. This is yet another breastfeeding app. And for this one, I decided to just use the basic color of the partner, the organization that we partnered with us on this app, and I just used it all throughout the app. Anytime there's a color, it's this color. Real simple. Here's another example. This app, so interesting thing with this app is I have these little, this is like a to-do list thing, and I have this little meter thing on the side to show you how in need of doing the tasks are. It's a cleaning app, so how dirty the thing is. And when I originally was designing this app, my first idea was to use little like stoplight colors, right? So when something was overdue, it would be red, and once you marked it complete, it would go green. And I mocked that up, and I looked at it, and I thought, I just don't like it. I don't like those colors. And I felt like if I was going to do that, I would need to tone down the actual interface color a lot because there was no color that really went with green and orange and red. So I took it out, and I decided instead to just use the actual bar itself to indicate how in need of doing it was, and the order of the table, and also to use the actual app tint color. So the more in need of doing the task is, the brighter the orange, right? Now, I can hear some people here thinking, you're going, well, James, you have reduced the usability of this app, right? Those stoplight colors you're talking, that was just another visual indication to the user that, of what's going on here, and you just took that out. And look, I don't disagree with you, but what I will say is just put a pin in that thought for now, because I'm going to come back at the end and I'm going to talk about some of my opinions on how we balance some of the competing concerns when we're designing an app. But you say, okay, but seriously, James, you're not hearing me. I can't even choose 1 color. I cannot be trusted to choose even a single nice color. Okay? Don't use any color at all. Instead of that, just use white and flip it around. It's a really cool look. And so what do I mean by that? Here is an app where I used that idea. And so literally, apart from there's a color in the navigation bar, and it's used in the app icon as well, but aside from that, everything in the app is white, right? The text is white, the buttons are white, the icons are white, everything is white. And it's really liberating. When you decide to do that, you need a new asset, yeah, it's white. Yeah, it's white. Everything's white. You don't have to think about it. And with this particular app, it was kind of cool because, as you can see, this is sort of an image sharing app. And so that meant that the content of the app, the actual photos, they could really stand out. They could really pop, to use the overused design word. And I could use the sort of blurred iOS-y color thing, and I just knew that nothing would clash. Everything would just let those photos just kind of stand on their own. So that was really nice. That's it for color. So let's talk about icons. And let me tell you, in my opinion, this is one of the surest signs that an app has been designed by someone who is at the start of their design career. The quality of the icons, the consistency of the icons, the selection of icons. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see made, sometimes even in surprisingly large apps, is inconsistent styling of icons. So you'll see things like this. You'll see some icons together, and in and of themselves, each icon is fine. There's nothing wrong with any particular one of them, but they're just clearly not the same. They're not from the same family. So, we have one on the left, which is obviously a really stylized I'm sure this came from like a set of icons where everyone had a little bit out of the circle, but obviously they couldn't find the other ones they wanted, so they used that, but some other things. And then you've got some that are filled and some that aren't filled. And it's fine to use filled icons to show selection state, but what you don't want is you don't want filled and non-filled icons in the same state, because then it's kind of confusing what's selected. So you've got that, you've got like a cartoony icon and the other ones aren't. It's just not good. Here's a slightly more subtle mistake you see being made. So these icons are fairly similar. They have the same kind of fatness. They are similarly sized. But of course, one of them is rounded and the other one isn't. I see this all the time. It really bugs me. Okay, so what we really want is we want them both to be rounded. So this is a little bit better. They're both rounded now, but of course, they're not rounded in the same way. One has, they have different radius on the corners. So what we really want is something more like that. We have now two fairly consistent icons. And this one, this just, yay, anvil. This is a real common mistake, inconsistent stroke weights. Okay, so these four icons, yep, they're good, they all fit together, they are the same style, but they're at different stroke weights and it looks bad. So we really want something more like that. And you can actually get font packs, font sets now that actually have stroke control. You can actually get in and change the stroke, make them fatter, make them consistent. It's really cool. So just make sure that you do check your icon line weights. And look, if this might be my best tip today, seriously, this website. You're thinking, well, where do I actually find good icons from? Seriously, just use flaticon.com. Just use it. This is what it looks like. Well, that's what it looked like when I screen capped this a little while ago. So what, 125,000 icons and 1,700 packs. They have little extensions that you can plug into Illustrator or maybe Sketch. You know, I need a magnifying glass, search, there's 20, choose the one you want, drag it straight in your project. It's just brilliant. I think you can use them for free with attribution, but seriously, you don't want to be attributing your icons in an app, right? So just pay, it's not very much, and it's just so worth it. I reckon in the last year, I could count on my fingers the number of icons that I have designed from scratch. You know, most icons I use are either from here or I start from here and tweak them and modify them, but I'm not going to sit drawing a magnifying glass icon in 2016, right? So just use this. This point here, if I could convince all of my clients of this point, I would be a happy man. I'm talking here about your actual app icon, right? Your home screen icon. They do not have to be literal representations of your app and what your app does. So here's a category of apps that is kind of hard to convey literally. This is like virtual networking apps, you know, control your computer from your phone kind of thing. So that is a very abstract concept to try and convey in an icon. And so, of course, most of the icons in that category are not super great. And the reason why I'm using this as the example is because I had an epiphany. Years ago, this was before I had ever written a line of code, before I had ever attempted to design an app. It was on my very first iPhone, the very first iPhone, and I had this, it was before the App Store, and I had this cool app for controlling my Mac. It was amazing. Like, seriously, like, we forget how cool it is having a pocket computer, but 2007 or 8 or whenever it was, controlling my Mac from it was amazing. So this was called Vadu. It still exists. I think it's called iTeleport now. But so it had, the first screen was exactly what you would expect. There's like a list of computers that you had set up. You chose the one you wanted. Maybe you put your password in. And then this screen appeared. And there was this animated vortex thing that span around for a while. It was just a glorified activity indicator, right? It's nothing particularly amazing. Span around, and eventually when it made its connection, you saw your desktop in the little hole, and it zoomed in, and you were in your desktop. So that was just kind of an interesting interface thing. But the thing is, it gave him a really perfect thing for his icon. All right? Anyone who had used that app would immediately recognize that as his app. Of course, it didn't look exactly like that. It looked like that because that's how we used to roll. And I remember seeing that. Remember, I had no idea I would ever be involved in making apps. But I remember seeing this and thinking, that's clever. It's clever to work out some interface thing that is not literal, but it still represents your app. And that stuck with me, and I've used it several times in my own apps. So going back to this guy, I can tell you from experience, when you make apps that are related to breasts and breastfeeding, it is hard to come up with icons that are both tasteful and are acceptable to Apple. In fact, funny story, you guys know Marco Arment, the independent app developer? He had a breastfeeding timing app, one of his first iOS apps. He's discontinued it now. But because he is Marco Arment, and a lot of people know who he is, when people found that he had one, a guy made an icon for him and gave it to him, and it looked like that. And I have always thought that is a brilliant icon. And I've considered actually emailing him and asking if I might possibly have it. So breastfeeding apps are hard to represent literally. And in this case, it's even harder because this isn't just about breastfeeding. This app is about breastfeeding and alcohol consumption. So I'm really glad the client did not want to go literal on this one. So I remembered Vadu, and I had a sort of a gap in the interface I needed to fill. I could have just put a simple little timer, like an egg timer type number thing would have been fine. But I decided to just jazz it up a little bit and to have this sort of dial thing. It filled a spot, it kind of animates nicely. But also it gave me a perfect device for my icon that I think just represents that app really nicely. Here's another example where I did this. This is a database of indigenous health and alcohol and other drug services with an indigenous focus. Again, don't want to touch that literally. And so I came up with really, really simple, just these little colored Doppler things that are the pins for the services. And so obviously that was perfect for the icon. The first iteration of the icon was real simple, just you can't quite see on the screen, but the dark red color is actually a dot painting blop, 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 with the icon on top. But we iterated on that a few times and came up with a more strongly kind of indigenous design that still references that little Doppler thing. So yeah, just don't feel that you need to be too literal with your app icon. Just look for something else you might potentially use if it's difficult. Okay, so let's talk a couple of things to do with layout. I have a red hot tip for you here. This is something really simple that you can do to improve your apps. It's to do with table views. Real common in mobile, right? Tables. So here is a very bog standard table-based app. I can give you a tip that you can improve the design of this app in one line of code. In fact, it's not even one line of code, it is one variable in one line of code. Okay, you ready? Watch this. Here we go. Bonk. Did you see that? I'll go back. Bonk. Right, I have just spread out those table view cells just a bit. Now, I absolutely know there are people here going, but what? Why would you? It doesn't need to be. Now there's more scrolling. There's more. What if there's 1,000 items in that table and there's going to be more? Yes, okay. I accept that if there are 1,000 items, there's going to be a bit more scrolling to get to the bottom. But I would suggest that if you have 1,000 items in a table and the only way to get to the bottom is by scrolling, you probably have other usability issues. Look, I'm sorry. What can I say? It's a trend. Designers are weird. Fashion is weird, and this is just something I've been observing over the years. Don't believe me? Here is the same screen in iOS 8 and iOS 9. Very similar, except it's just got wider cells. What can I say? So just try it out, just make them a little bit bigger to start with, just ease yourself into it, and everything will be fine. Your users their fingers will be okay. So yeah, give that a try. And in fact, if you look at every one of my apps that I have shown you that has some kind of table-based layout, every one of them has cells that are wider than they technically need to be. So yeah, bump up your table view rows just a little bit. This one here, this won't be popular in this room, I understand this. Mathematics is great. We love maths. Maths does cool things. Maths does not have the most reliable design taste. So what do I mean? Have a look at this. All right, 2 icons. Which one of these is correctly centered in the circle? Obviously, it's this one, right? Clearly, that is the one that is centered. Well, mathematics disagrees. Math says that the one on the left is the one that is centered correctly. And the funny thing is that the longer you look at this, when you can see the bounding box of the shape, you start to go, oh, yeah, no, it is that one. Yeah, that's right. So let's just remind ourselves, no, that is not correct. So this is called optical alignment as opposed to mathematical alignment. Here is another example. So here are 3 shapes, and we want these shapes to be consistently sized, we want to get them to be the same size, and we want them to be nice and evenly distributed. So how can we do that? Well, again, maths comes in, pushes up its glasses and says, well, actually, they already are. All right? They already have the same height and width, and the spacing is perfect, you're fine. But of course, we're not fine. So the first issue here is just kind of a funny thing that we've ended up with kind of an ugly triangle, right? Because we've got a perfect square, we've got a perfect circle, but in order to use the same height and weight, we've ended up with a funny, tall triangle, right? What we really want is we want a nice equilateral triangle. So let's start with that. All right, so now the triangle is just a nicer triangle, cool. But yeah, we have a spacing issue. Again, math says we don't, but we clearly do. And anyone who has worked with text will recognize this issue as a kerning issue, right? We've got a triangle, it has a little pointy bit at the bottom, we've got a circle, and they just want to be friends. It just wants to slide under there. So we'll adjust the kerning, we'll bring that in a little bit. Yeah, that's much nicer. So now the spacing looks good, we've got a nice triangle. There's one more issue here. Have a look at the circle. It looks smaller, right? Now we know it's not, it's got the same height, it's got the same width, but it's just something about the way our eyes work. The square fills its bounding box perfectly, so it looks bigger than the circle, which doesn't. So we're going to have to just nudge that circle up a little bit, a triangle a little bit as well. And to my eyes anyway, now these look pretty consistently sized, consistently spaced. We probably want to push that triangle down a little bit because it's aligned on the baseline and it's taller at the top, but that's pretty good now. But look how far we have come from mathematics recommendations, right? We're miles off. Just one little tip here though, one way that you can get around this without having to fiddle with shapes is if you just put a bounding box around your shape, so I've gone back here to the original shapes apart from the equilateral triangle. If you just put the bounding boxes around them, it just reduces the apparent discrepancy and it kind of looks okay again. So despite what Apple might tell you, outlines around buttons are still kind of useful. So essentially what I'm saying here is, look, developer, sometimes you just have to turn off the computer targeting system and just use the force. There's nothing else for it. Okay, so I think that's my last tip. So I'm going to finish with sort of a final, I'm going to get on my soapbox, right? I'm going to sermonize for a little while. A lot of the time you will hear people say some variation of this idea. They will say, look, I want my app to look good. I think design is great. Yep, designers are cool. I'm glad we have designers. But look, usability is the most important thing, right? So I don't want to make any design decisions that have a negative impact on usability. We must make usability the most important thing. And if we were to take that sentiment and put it into a diagram, it would look something like this, right? So here is if you like, the holy trinity of considerations, of competing concerns when you design an app. You have functionality, which is what the app does. You have usability, which is how easy it is to do the things that the app does. And you have aesthetics, which is everything I've been talking about today. And so this idea that usability is king, that must be the primary concern, it would look like this. And it sounds right, doesn't it? It's got a ring of truth to it. Of course usability should be the number one concern. But here's what I would argue. If we take this idea to its logical conclusion, we would end up with a situation where every one of our apps look like this. Because seriously, this app is so usable. Right? It uses a table. Everyone knows how to use tables. They know to scroll. It uses the system font. We know that Apple has tested the system font all over the place. You know, they know it's a really, really usable font. We use tab bar. People know tab bars. We use this blue, which is a really, it's the default Xcode selection color. I would argue any change we make to this app, any way we try and tart it up or change the design is going to have an impact on usability. Whether it's the font, the colors, or some kind of cool other way it's going to reduce usability. So I don't think we want all our apps to look like this. We want our apps to be cool. We want them to be interesting. We want them to be fun. And our users want that as well. So I just don't think we can have that kind of mentality. But of course we can't swing it in other ways either. So this is another way we could do it. We could say, well, look, functionality is the most important thing. It's way more important than what it looks like. And of course, we tried this as an industry, right? The software industry did this for many, many years, and all of our apps look like this. Okay, so this is not a good idea either. Now, of course, there's one other possibility. We could do it this way. We could let Mark go crazy. We could let all our designers just run rampant and just come up with whatever they want to do and do this. Well, of course, what happens when we do this? We end up with apps that look like this. So remember this? This is Claire, right? It's this cool gesture-based to-do app. No buttons, no menus. You pinch to do something and you swipe to do something else. Now, this is a cool app, right? I'm glad that apps like this exist. It was really popular. But I'm sure we can agree that this has to be the exception, not the rule. Okay, right? We can't hide everything behind gestures and have all these apps like, we just can't do that. And of course, this idea also leads us to this design approach in web, where we have websites that, like this car, are very, very beautiful, but not very easy to get in and out of. And unlike this car, they are not very fast. Now, I don't know about you, but I like that websites like this exist. I have been known to design some websites that look like this. But again, I'm sure we can agree that the whole internet can't look like this, right? We can't go right down that rabbit hole. So what I believe is that the best apps happen when they are made by teams of people who are passionate about all of these three things. And they will fight and they will argue and they will advocate for their thing, and they will come to some kind of compromise and some kind of happy balance of these three competing concerns. That's what makes the best apps. And they will have those discussions, and it's not a case of one of them will always win because they're more senior or because the team has already decided that one concern will be the primary. No, this is ongoing, and it's not just at the start. That's the thing. It's not just when the app is first being designed. It's this ongoing tension and conversation that goes right throughout the whole lifespan of the app. That's what leads to good apps. But I guess I am a designer, and it would be wrong of me to not finish by saying if you have to prioritize one of these things, you should totally prioritize aesthetics. because nothing ever goes wrong when you prioritize aesthetics. So sometimes things can go wrong when you prioritize prosthetics, but that's a different presentation. So that is the end of my talk. Thank you. I think we've got time for questions, but maybe no answers. No, we've got time. We're good. Are there any? Hello, yes.
Okay, so a couple of points during that talk. You basically said things like, things to the effect of, here's A, here's B, B is clearly better. Now, if you put that in the hands of my mother, you end up with Comic Sans on everything. If you put it in the hands of my father, you end up with Dayglow green next to Dayglow orange. How do you know when it looks better to me is actually better?
Wow. How do we know that, Mark? Look, like I said when I was talking about the table view cells, can I just, honestly, how many people here looked at that, and when I showed skinny cells, wider cells, how many people looked at that and went, really? And just are not really on board with that idea? Honestly, please, there's some hands here. And that's a great example because I can't explain why it looks better. I can't explain. I mean, I could lean on things like, it's more spacious, it just lets the app breathe a little. I can use some of that designy language. But seriously, for every time a designer uses that kind of flowery language, it really is dressing up, I think it looks good, right? That is what designers do. They work out things that look good to them. And how does fashion work? Why are we now wearing much tighter trousers than we wore, a decade ago? I don't know, because people decided it looks better. And obviously, the point of this talk is I want to be clear about this. The point of this talk is not to counteract what Russell said in that, you should work with designers. I absolutely endorse that. If you can work with a designer and you can work with someone who's passionate about their craft and you're passionate about your craft as a developer, that is the best. That is the best situation. But the point of this talk was, are there some little things that I can nudge my app in a kind of more of a designy direction? And I guess in answer to your question, it's can I do some of these things that would nudge it into what many designers and I guess a lot of users seem to think look good at the moment? There's no objectiveness to it. I don't know. It looks nice. Tim. Yes.
You're sitting down and you're taking in the client's vision. How do you go about steering that towards something you know will look good and function and meet the three balance of three things?
Yeah, well, so this is me acting as a designer for a client.
Yes.
Yeah. So the question is, yeah, I'm working with a client. They know what they want. Usually they will know the functionality they want. They might have some ideas on design and how do you steer them in the right direction. And I guess this is probably not a question that's relevant to many people in this room, who wouldn't be in that position of designing an app for a client. But to me, I mean, I've got to be honest, part of it is just being able to show enough of a track history that the client will trust your judgment, right? Like, if I can show them examples of apps and I can show them some metrics that show that this app was somewhat successful or this app has done something the client liked it, it's just a way of kind of establishing my, that I kind of know what I'm talking about, that I kind of had good taste. And I guess I'm fortunate that a lot of my clients have accepted that. Now, of course, sometimes, you do end up with a situation where you have a different vision to your client. And this is a really funny thing about being a graphic designer. There is a point where you hit a wall where the client wants one thing and you think it's not a good idea and the client won't budge. And I have seen this so many times where designers will sulk. Who has seen a designer sulking on this where they don't get their way? Who has sulked as a designer? And so everyone has those emotions. As Russell said, designers actually have feelings. We are different to you. And so we go into our room and we sulk a bit. But so we all do that. But here's where it goes different. Some designers come out of that funk and they decide to sabotage the project, right? They decide, well, screw it. Okay, he wants that. I will do it exactly the way he said. I will do it precisely like that. It'll look terrible. And in their mind, they imagine that the client will see the thing and they will come back to them and go, oh, James, you were so right. Why did I ever doubt your judgment? Do it the way you thought. Now, guess what? It doesn't work like that. You do it that way and they see it and they go, oh, James is not very good, right? They blame you. So no, the better way is to come out of it and go, okay, I didn't win this. How can I make this work? How can I do what the client did? I'm not going to do exactly what they did because I know that's not going to work, but there must be a way that I can do the thing they want, that somehow I'm going to tweak it, I'm going to just guide it to something else, and I'll make it work. And that's hard for your ego because you're going to make it work, and they're going to look at it and they're going to go, see? Didn't I tell you that was a good thing to do? But you just got to let it go as a designer. You've just got to think about the user, you've got to think about the outcome, you've got to think about your sanity, and just deal with it. Someone at the back had a question. Yeah. Yeah, so using fonts, a lot of custom fonts will have licensing you have to pay for. This is hilarious. Talking about Vespa. So John Gruber, independent Apple guy, had an app, didn't work. He just pulled it recently. And he wrote a big eulogy about why it didn't work. And the thing that really stood out to me about it was, couldn't keep it. So why not just keep it running? It's just an app, one was it had a server component, a syncing component. Okay, that makes sense. You've got syncing costs. But another reason he cited was that they couldn't afford to keep paying the licensing fee on the font. I just read that. I went, you shut down your app partially because you couldn't afford the font that you chose. I have never used a font that had a licensing fee, right? If it's like a really well-known professional font, chances are it is available in iOS, and I will just use it. And of course, in Android, it won't be available, so I'll do something else. If I'm using a custom font, I will use Google Fonts, and I will choose something from there. But I'm not gonna try and convince my client to spend money over the years licensing a font. That's crazy. But maybe you want to do that if you've got money to burn. I'm getting fingers that I think mean it's kind of the end. So speaking of usability, this is my This is a terrible usability. This is my email address, my Twitter handle, and my website address all in one very unusable slide. So talk to me. Thank you very much.